That sure matches Hugh's description, Frankie said in a voice like ice.
Frankie, I'm not...
Dany's protestation was cut off by his phone beeping. Frankie nodded at Jack, who walked over to where Dany still lay on his side. Jack pulled the phone out of his pocket and handed it to Frankie. Frankie scrolled through the phone. When he found what he was looking for, he held it out so everyone could see. "Do you still want to deny it?" he asked. The phone showed a chat log between Dany and one of Hugh's underlings, arranging for a check for $1 million to be paid to Dany after Hugh's visit to Frankie.
"Someone is framing me," Dany protested. "Boss, you've got to believe me."
Frankie kicked Dany again.
"Do you think I'm a fool? Who else besides you and Jack knew about our plans over the next few days? How did Hugh find out we were going to ambush him?"
Dany was speechless. He had no comeback. Nothing he could say to change Frankie's mind.
"Take him out of here," Frankie said, "and get rid of him. I don't want to see him again."
There were no questions about what that meant. Jack sighed and hauled Dany to his feet. "Wait," Frazer said, stepping forward.
"What?" Frankie demanded. "Do you want to plead for his life? Because it's not going to work. I've made my decision."
"Nothing like that. But he might know more than he's letting on. Let me deal with him. After I'm done questioning him, I'll take care of this traitor." Frankie shook his head.
"After all we've learned, you're still determined to go up against Hugh? Don't you see how pointless it is? If Hugh could bribe my top lieutenant, he could bribe anyone."
"Well, we won't know until we ask him, will we? Maybe I'll learn something useful I can use against Hugh."
"He thinks he's so confident," Frankie thought. "But he's just ignorant." "Fine," Frankie said. "But I'll be the first to say this. If anything goes sideways, don't blame me for it. And I meant it when I said I don't want to ever see him again."
"Of course." Frazer tied Dany's hands and pushed him toward his car, where he threw him unceremoniously into the back seat. 3 miles later, Frazer glanced into the rearview mirror and saw that Dany had managed to get himself upright. Frazer tossed a knife into the back seat. "Go ahead and cut yourself free," he said. "Unless, of course, you prefer being bound." Dany stared at Frazer in shock.
Aren't you going to torture me for information? Then aren't you worried that if I get free, I'm going to stab you in the back? I mean, literally."
Frazer smiled. "Sure. I'll ask you for information. What can you tell me about Hugh?" Dany was speechless.
Nothing," he said finally. "I've never even seen the guy. I mean, maybe I had contact with one of his goons last night, but I didn't exactly see who hit me. That's all I know, seriously."
Frazer didn't even look into the rearview mirror as he heard the sound of the knife working on the rope. "So you and Hugh have no working relationship?" "No, I'm not worried about you stabbing me in the back."
"You know I was framed?"
Frazer nodded. I also know who the real informant is, he thought. But he wasn't about to tell Dany that.
Then, why didn't you say something to Frankie? Turn around! We've got to go back to the club!
He reached over the seat and tried to snatch the steering wheel. Frazer was focused on driving. Without turning around, he lifted his right hand and punched Dany backward. Dany fell heavily onto the back seat, stunned.
He barely used any strength, and he sent me flying, he thought. I'm just lucky this seat is so well padded, or I could have been seriously hurt. And he controlled his movements so precisely. How did he do that?
Frankie has changed, Frazer said. It won't be long before he's back under Hugh's thumb. Things could get very dangerous for you when that happens.
No way,
Dany said.
Frankie went back and forth with Hugh for years before he broke away. Why would he go back now?
Because he's scared, Frazer sighed. I'm disappointed in him, actually. This morning, Hugh used you as a pawn to frighten Frankie, and it worked. Frankie thinks that Hugh knows everything now, and he's afraid.
What do you mean? Why would Frankie be scared? And what do you mean that I was a pawn? I thought I knew where I stood, he thought. Now it's not that simple anymore.
If I'm right, you were ambushed by Hugh's men yesterday. They knocked you out, planted the check on you, and threw you into a hotel room. And June at the hotel's front desk was also bribed to keep quiet. It's simple to forge evidence and make someone else believe it's real. Dany was thinking hard.
I was obviously set up, he thought. I'm Frankie's top lieutenant. I'm the obvious choice if they want to frame somebody.
And if my guess is correct, Frazer continued, then they've moved or otherwise silenced June by now as well.
June!
Dany exclaimed.
I have to get in touch with her. Maybe if I talk to her, she can explain what happened. She can clear my name.
Frazer just shook his head. But Dany fumbled with his coat until he found the pocket Frankie had put his phone back into. Frankie hadn't wanted to deal with getting rid of the evidence. Dany quickly dialed the hotel's front desk.
Hello?
He said when the call was answered.
Who is this? Is June there? It's Dany. Tell her I have to talk to her. It's urgent.
June just left, the person on duty informed him. Her uncle came to fetch her? He said something about her grandmother being ill. Dany felt like he had been struck by lightning. He had been sleeping at that hotel and occasionally bringing women there for a long time.
I know a lot of things, he thought. And I know that June doesn't have an uncle.
Dany hung up the phone and stared at Frazer's back in shock. If Frazer had guessed correctly, it was possible that Hugh's men had bribed June to frame him and then likely killed her to keep her mouth shut. Now, the only witness was probably gone. It was impossible for him to resolve his conflict with Frankie.
Frazer, Hugh and Frankie are allies,
Dany argued.
Help me persuade him to...
I told you, Frazer interrupted. Frankie is already scared of Hugh. He is afraid to do anything against Hugh. I don't think he'll cooperate with us. They sat in uncomfortable silence for a few minutes, lost in thought. Frazer didn't want to, but he had to give up on Frankie.
If Frankie truly defends Hugh, he is a real traitor. Such a man is not worth following, Dany said with conviction.
If that's true, why don't you join me, Ryan, and Malcolm? Frazer suggested. We can work as one. How about that? Dany felt honored. He had already been envious of Ryan. From the beginning, he had thrown in his support for Frazer, a man who didn't have any previous street cred. The move had become a topic of gossip on the streets. However, they ignored the gossip and continued to do whatever they wanted. As people got used to having Frazer around, Malcolm joined his gang. Gossip had started all over again. Everyone wondered how Frazer had nabbed a powerful fighter like Malcolm.
I'll think about it,
Dany said seriously. The two of them exchanged their contact information before parting ways. Frazer went to the company's office for a while before returning home. When he pulled into the drive, he saw an expensive sports car parked in front of the house. Natalia was standing beside it, talking with a wealthy-looking young man. Frazer frowned. Although Natalia didn't like the idea of Nick wanting to spend so much time with her, she had been happy to get out and grab a bite to eat and go shopping with him that day. It had felt comfortable and familiar, as if they had returned to their childhood. Would it be okay if I come back tomorrow? Nick asked. The late afternoon sun bathed him in its glow, and Natalia found she couldn't look away. I had the day off today, so I have to go back to work tomorrow, she said, tactfully refusing the invitation. No problem, he smiled persuasively.
I'll pick you up after work.
I'll let you know if I can. I'll call you tomorrow. See you later. Natalia turned around and was about to go inside the house when she caught a glimpse of Frazer standing near the end of the driveway. He had a frown on his face. Nick followed her gaze and also noticed Frazer. It was the first time they had met.
Who's that? Nick asked,
pretending not to know who Frazer was. In fact, when he was overseas, he had thoroughly investigated Frazer. He learned that he had been college classmates with Natalia and then sweethearts. Nick knew that even though the two had gotten married, her family didn't like her husband very much. Figuring that he still had a chance of wooing Natalia, Nick got a divorce from his wife and came to California to woo his childhood flame. Seeing the look on her face at that moment, he sensed that Natalia didn't like Frazer very much either. He studied Frazer and wasn't impressed by what he saw. Her husband seemed weak and awkward. He suspected that they didn't have a very intimate relationship. Inwardly, Nick smiled in triumph. He still had a chance. He's... Natalia trailed off as she thought about what had happened the previous night. He's just a loser. You don't have to worry about him. Nick's eyes glinted as he studied her. Although her words were cold and bitter, conveying a deep dislike, he sensed that there was another meaning to her words. He would have to watch their relationship closely. Nick put on his usual charming smile and took the initiative to walk over to the other man. He stretched out his right hand.
I assume you're Frazer, he asked. Thank you for taking care of Natalia these past few years. I'm Nick. Natalia and I have been friends since childhood. Good friends.
Frazer didn't move, nor shake the other man's still outstretched hand. He immediately sensed that Nick was up to no good. His words were smooth yet full of threat. He wants to thank me for taking care of Natalia, he thought. What does he mean by that? It's as if he's trying to say I've been watching over her for him and that she's his. When Natalia saw Frazer's cold, in fact, complete lack of a greeting, she was infuriated. Why does he always embarrass me? She wondered. He doesn't even know the most basic form of politeness. It's polite to shake hands. What is he playing at? At that moment, the front door of the house was open. Dorothy had been looking forward to Natalia and Nick's return all afternoon. When she heard the commotion outside, she rushed out to take a look. She grew outraged when she saw Frazer refuse to shake Nick's hand.
Frazer, she scolded. Didn't anyone ever teach you any manners?
She immediately put on a smiling face and turned to Nick apologetically.
Oh, I'm so sorry about this. My son-in-law was raised poorly. Please, come inside and visit for a while. We haven't seen you in ages.
Miss Laplace, I'm not offended by him, Nick said soothingly.
He glanced at his watch.
It's getting late. I should probably go. I'll call you tomorrow if that's okay.
Nick smiled at Natalia, seemingly reminding her that he would see her after work the following day, and then entered his sports car and drove away. Dorothy watched him go, a look of admiration on her face.
What a lovely car, she said. Have you ever seen one so luxurious and expensive? It makes your car look downright cheap, Frazer.
She glared at Frazer, took Natalia's arm, and dragged her inside, slamming the door behind her. Frazer shook his head and thought bitterly. As if I've never seen a luxury car. On the day I was born, my family celebrated by gifting me dozens of luxury cars. They gave me yachts and villas. So yes, I do know something about luxury. However, all of that had disappeared with Ben's betrayal, leaving only the memory of what had been taken from him. Frazer sighed. It had been a rough couple of days. Frankie had defected to the enemy, and his wife was being courted by another man. He wasn't sure what to expect next. For now, all he could do was drag his feet reluctantly inside the house. As soon as he entered, he heard Dorothy's loud voice coming from the living room.
Natalia, tell me truthfully, how far have you two gone together?
Mom, Natalia scolded.
Nick is only my childhood friend. It's impossible for the two of us to be together.
She heard the sound of the front door closing and saw Frazer walking in, his face somber. He looked as if she had done something that really let him down. Seeing that Natalia was unwilling to reveal anything, Dorothy thought she was just too shy to share details, so she stopped pushing. She turned to Frazer and asked,
"What's the matter? Are you unwilling to apologize and explain your behavior?"
Frazer was in a bad mood and didn't want to argue, so he went to the kitchen to cook dinner. Dorothy cursed and sat down.
How rude. Other than his cooking, we don't know anything else about him. He's really useless.
After dinner, Natalia wanted to say something to Frazer but hesitated. She wanted to tell him that there was nothing between her and Nick, but when she thought about Frazer's attitude, she grew irritated and went to bed instead. After tossing and turning in bed for an unknown amount of time, Natalia found she couldn't fall asleep. Frazer couldn't sleep either, and he could hear his wife's restlessness beside him. "So," he began softly, "do you want to tell me about Nick and you as kids?"
"We just grew up together. He always flirted with me, but I never liked him in that way."
Natalia felt the need to explain the situation, not only to Frazer, but to emphasize her thoughts to herself. "Nick is handsome, well-spoken, and rich. He must have been popular when he was younger," muttered Frazer, his tone odd. Surprised at what she thought she heard in his voice, she lifted her head to look at him. But the room was dark and she couldn't see him.
He sounded jealous, she thought. Could I have misheard him?
He stayed silent, so she went on.
How should I put it? Everyone liked him, adults and kids alike. All the kids wanted to be his friends. He attended my birthday parties from when I was 7 to when I turned 18.
She paused and added,
He gave me that little doll next to the TV set. He's always been good at attracting the ladies. Even when he pursued me, he chased other girls at the same time. It always made me jealous.
Natalia couldn't stop talking. She wanted to tell Frazer the bad points about Nick, but in truth, she still liked him and couldn't stop herself from saying good things about him too. She felt she needed to explain things to Frazer so that he could understand that Nick wasn't a bad guy, and that she didn't have feelings for him. She tried to look through the darkness again to observe Frazer's reaction, but still couldn't see him.
In the end, I knew I didn't like him in the way he wanted me to, she said. And he hasn't changed. He's still a ladies' man, even while he tries to flirt with me.
Natalia bit her lip and stopped talking.
What am I doing? She thought. Why do I feel like I have to explain myself to him? Even if I told him everything, what could he do? Could he help me chase Nick away? Will he ever be as impressive as Nick is? I doubt it.
Now that she had gotten everything off her chest, she felt better. Frazer still hadn't said anything, so she hugged her pillow, rolled over, and finally fell asleep. In the dark of the room, Frazer remained still, staring up into the darkness. He had listened intently to her words and the meaning behind them. She obviously had feelings for Nick at one time. I just can't figure out if she truly doesn't have feelings for the man anymore, he thought. In any case, he felt better when she had opened up to him. He wished she did it more often, but he would take what he could get. With a sigh of contentment, he drifted off to sleep.
Hey guys, Frazer here. Listen to the full episode of Unraveling the Son-In-Law exclusively on Pocket FM app. Click the link in description to install the app now.